This is Damon Fordham, author and historian, as well as the writer of 3 books on South Carolina's African American history. And I'm here to tell you about an important event in American history. September 15th, 1963. The 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. This was at a very heavy time in that city's history, as well as that state, as well as the United States, as a matter of fact. Several months earlier, Dr. Martin Luther King, along with the local leaders such as Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, led large numbers of citizens, as well as many young children who took it upon themselves to do so, on demonstrations that were met with dogs and fire hoses to bring equality to that city. As a result, President John F. Kennedy decided to push a civil rights bill through Congress that would eventually work to end segregation. Also, Governor George Wallace would stand in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama in Auburn to keep out 2 black students, which fortunately the National Guard made him step aside and the students entered. And the great civil rights leader in Jackson, Mississippi, Medgar Evers, was killed the same day that Governor Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door. Pretty heavy times. It was a couple of months after that that Dr. King and A. Philip Randolph, as well as John Lewis and Roy Wilkins and numerous others, marched on Washington, and Dr. King, of course, gave the I Have a Dream speech. But less than a month after that, September 15th, you had the regular church services. The Reverend John H. Cross prepared to preach a sermon called The Love That Forgives. In the church sanctuary that day was this lady who I am pictured with here. This is Miss Ernestine Mall. She was one of the congregants of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. I took this and several other such pictures in the summers of 1999 and 1998 when I would take children on field trips to meet these people and see these areas for themselves. And we also did a documentary in 1999 about all this called Where Do We Go From Here? That's where all the following pictures originated. Anyway, while they were upstairs preparing for the service, 80 children were in the basement area preparing for Sunday school, including these 4 girls that you see here. Let's see, this is Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Denise McNair, and Carol Robertson. They were all about 14 or 11 years old that particular time. And what history doesn't also record is that along with those 4 little girls, they were in the basement of that church, preparing for Sunday school to end. And also another young lady stopped by to greet them in the bathroom. This is myself with the young lady who's seated here. This is Carolyn Mall McKinstry. That's me standing behind her, and that's her seated at front there. Carolyn McKinstry. She stopped to talk to the 4 girls. Well, about 15 or so seconds or after she left the bathroom, a bomb went off and killed those 4 little girls. All of that took place in the basement area of the church where the Sunday school was being held. As a matter of fact, this is a picture of myself in that very same basement in 1999. That's me pointing to the portrait of the 4 little girls in the very basement where all this took place. Anyway, all of that was followed by some rioting in the city among some of the African Americans who were upset about this. And so Governor Wallace sent in the federal troops. Dr. King sent a telegram to Governor Wallace saying that the blood of those girls was on his hands based on his irresponsible actions toward catering to bigots and segregationists. Well, those bombings fortunately were solved, but as Dr. King himself would say, justice delayed is justice denied. He also, in fact, shortly after the bombing took place, gave a very moving eulogy to the girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church. Part of that eulogy, which I think is very important and interesting, went as follows. History has proven over and over again that unmerited suffering is redemptive. The innocent blood of these little girls may well serve as a redemptive force that will bring a new light to this dark city. The Holy Scripture says a little child shall lead them. The death of these little children may lead our whole Southland from the low road of man's inhumanity to the high road of peace and brotherhood. Another interesting thing about that bombing to mention too. Much of the church was blown out, and ironically, the face of Christ was still intact except for one part. The eyes of Christ the picture of Christ were blown out in that church. And eventually a European church paid for much of the repair of that church. And as I mentioned, the murderers were eventually caught. Among them were these two guys, Thomas Blanton and Bobby Frank Cherry. They were both arrested for crime about the year 2000 or so. That's them right there. There was another Klansman by the name of Bob Chambliss, who was also convicted of this, who eventually died in prison. Now, that story has been told in many cases. They had the movie Four Little Girls with Spike Lee. He did a documentary on them. And one of those people in that documentary was this very interesting individual right here. Let's see. Here he is. This gentleman that you see right here is the father of Denise McNair. This is Mr. Chris McNair, who, myself and him in 1998, he did much of the narration for the movie Four Little Girls. His daughter, Denise, was killed in that blast. When I saw him in 1999, he said something very profound. He spoke before the group of children that I chaperoned there, and one of the fellow chaperones asked him, "Mr. McNair, why are you still here in Birmingham after all that has happened to you and your family?" And he said something I want you to think about. He said, "If a fire is burning your house, do you go somewhere else to put it out?" Think about that for a minute. Now, that's the story that a lot of people know. That, as I mentioned, was told in the movie Four Little Girls. But here's the story that you don't know. Along with those four little girls who were killed that day were these two little boys. Here you see Johnny Robinson over here, who was about 16 years old at the time. And this boy over here, this is Virgil Ware, who was 13. They were also killed on September the 15th, 1963. Basically, what happened was that after the bombing, as I mentioned, there was some rioting there. And a group of white teenagers were taunting a group of black children, yelling 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate, and so forth. And so a group of black boys, including Johnny, was allegedly throwing rocks at the teenagers, and as well as at some police cars. So one police car chased the boys and unfortunately shot Johnny to death. Then, after this, of course, his family was very devastated by the news, needless to say. Then, as for Virgil, a group of young teenagers were coming from a segregationist rally where they shot Virgil while he was riding his bicycle. The two boys who shot him were eventually put in juvenile custody but were released 2 years later in 1965. And one of them begged forgiveness from Virgil's family, and he got it. It was not until 2013 that the two little boys were also given recognition with the four little girls in a ceremony honoring them in Birmingham. Unfortunately, Virgil's father lived to see that take place before he died. And Virgil's family said that all we wanted was that the whole story be told. not just of the 4 little girls, but also the 2 little boys. And basically that's why I'm here before you today, to tell you the whole story of the 4 little girls and the 2 little boys in Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. This is Damon Fordham.